There's a specific type of person who remembers the exact frustration of rewinding a VHS tape before dragging it back to Blockbuster, and also remembers the precise week the internet changed everything with their first downloaded MP3. Not someone who only knows Spotify, not someone who never owned a Walkman, someone who lived through both worlds back to back, right in the middle of figuring out who they were supposed to be. If you were born between 1976 and 1985, psychologists spent decades not quite knowing where to put you. And that confusion, it turns out, says more than you'd expect. In 2014, sociologist Sarah Stanorb finally gave this group a name, Xennials, a microgeneration born between 1977 and 1985, wedged in the gap between Gen X and Millennials. Some researchers prefer a different label entirely, the Oregon Trail generation, named after that old computer game so many of you navigated in school, always moving through uncertain terrain, always working with limited supplies, always figuring out the next step as you went. It's a more accurate description than it first sounds. Most generational research operates in wide windows. Boomers, Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z. Xennials stretch maybe 8 or 9 years. That's not a generation. That's a very specific moment in history. And what happened inside that moment left a mark that no broader category can fully explain. Not because this group is somehow superior, but because of what happened, and more critically, when. Think about what daily life genuinely looked like before the internet existed. You passed notes in class, folded carefully, slipped quietly, knowing they could be intercepted at any moment. You made plans to meet someone at a specific corner at a specific time, then walked there and waited. No texts, no way to know if they were running late. They either showed up or they didn't, and people remembered exactly which one you were. Miss a TV show, it was simply gone. No rewind, no catch-up, no algorithm saving it for later. Just gone. You asked a friend to describe what you missed and spent the rest of the week filling in the gaps with your own imagination. And your mistakes, that ugly fight at a party, that embarrassing thing you said in front of exactly the wrong person, that phase in 9th grade you'd rather forget, they faded, naturally, quietly. Nobody archived them, nobody screenshotted them. They lived in a handful of people's memories and slowly dissolved into something softer, the way memories always do when nothing is there to keep them sharp. The brain is actually built for precisely this, to let things shift over time, to hold on to what still matters and release what doesn't. Growing up in a world that allowed that process meant your past could become a story, something you shaped, something that evolved, not a permanent file you were forced to live inside forever. Then, right as you were stepping into your late teens and early 20s, the entire world changed. Not gradually, not in a way that gave anyone time to adjust, practically overnight. Email, mobile phones, faster connections. MySpace, broadband. Within just a few years, the world you had grown up in essentially stopped existing, and a completely different one appeared in its place. Research in Nature Neuroscience found that the part of the brain responsible for learning new systems keeps developing until around age 25. You hit the entire digital revolution inside that window. Old enough to remember clearly what came before, young enough that your brain was still genuinely, organically open to what replaced it. Gen Xers had to learn the internet the way an adult learns a second language. Functional, sometimes even fluent, but never quite effortless. There's always a moment of translation happening somewhere underneath. Younger millennials and Gen Z grew up inside it entirely. For them, the internet isn't a tool they consciously picked up and learned. It's the water they swim in. They've never known anything else.
You're the only group that holds both. You remember exactly what it felt like to leave the house and be genuinely, completely unreachable for hours. And you also move through 17 different messaging platforms without a trace of anxiety. Not because you're exceptional, because the door happened to be open at precisely the right moment, and then it closed. But there's a part of this story that almost nobody talks about. You entered the job market right around the dot-com bust of the early 2000s. First real jobs, first apartments, first serious attempt at building something that resembled a life. And almost immediately, the floor dropped. You rebuilt, slowly, carefully, quietly, and just as you were finally reaching your most stable years, 2008 arrived and took another piece of it. Economists have a name for what that does to a person. They call it a scarring effect. Financial instability in your early career leaves a mark that doesn't simply disappear when the economy recovers and the headlines move on. You can see it in small, almost invisible decisions. The emergency fund that never quite feels large enough, no matter how much is in it. The backup plan constructed even when there's no obvious reason to need one. The slight, almost imperceptible hesitation before committing to anything permanent, even when everything around you looks completely fine. That's not anxiety. It's closer to muscle memory. Your body remembering something your mind has already moved past. If you've noticed that pattern in yourself and never quite understood where it came from, now you do.
But here's something worth pausing on, because not all of this is strength. You frequently end up as the natural translator in any room, between older colleagues who want process and hierarchy and younger ones who want speed and autonomy. Between the generation that tenses up around new technology and the generation that has never known anything else. Between the past and the present, constantly in meeting rooms and group chats and family dinners. That position looks like an asset, and often it genuinely is. But being the person who bridges every gap means you are constantly absorbing friction between two sides, making things function, smoothing things over, keeping the peace, without anyone pausing to ask what any of that actually costs you. Psychologists have a name for that too. They call it emotional labor. And the people who carry it habitually tend to stop noticing that they're doing it at all. It stops feeling like effort. It starts feeling like simply how things are, just your personality, just your nature, just who you've always been. And that's precisely what makes it so easy to miss how much it is actually taking from you. If you've spent years being the reliable one, the one who holds it together, the one people call, the one who somehow always knows what to do, and you felt a tiredness underneath all of it that you couldn't quite locate or explain, that is not a personality trait. That is what it costs to hold things together for a long time without ever putting them down. So come back to that VHS tape for a moment. The person who rewound it before returning it and then figured out MP3s a few years later didn't do that because they were especially adaptable. They didn't do it because they were gifted with some rare flexibility that others weren't born with. They did it because they had no other choice. The world changed, and they changed with it, quietly, without drama, without losing the version of themselves that had existed before any of it began. That's quieter than it sounds, and rarer than most people ever stop to realize. You watched a world end, not with an announcement, not with a clear and official before and after, not with anyone standing up to mark the moment. Just slowly, then suddenly, the way things always change when you're not watching them directly. And then you watched another one begin.
Old enough to understand what was being left behind. Old enough to feel the weight of it. Young enough to move into what came next without getting stuck at the border, without spending years grieving a version of life that was already gone. Most people get one world. They're born into it, shaped by it, and they spend the rest of their lives understanding themselves through it. You got the seam, the exact place where one version of human life quietly stitched itself into a completely different one. No ceremony, no guidebook, no one who had done it before you to tell you how it was supposed to feel. You simply lived through it, and in living through it, you learned something that never announced itself as a lesson, that who you are doesn't have to be determined by the world you started in. In a time when the ground keeps shifting beneath everyone's feet, when change arrives faster than anyone can prepare for, and certainty feels increasingly difficult to hold on to, the people who have already practiced landing steadily when everything moved, without losing track of where they came from, carry something that cannot be packaged, cannot be taught in a course, cannot be handed to someone who hasn't earned it. It can only be lived through. And you lived through it.